And then I went to the picket line and talked to the workers, and I mean, the media was intrigued because, you know, they were ready for me to obviously go to the picket line, talk to the workers, which I did. But I wanted to open the story up a bit more and show what the effects this would have on small businesses, suppliers, you know, people who, you know, have kept their local businesses going.
Even the food bank, if I might add,
yeah.
in there. General Foods was a big contributor.
Thank you very much for coming out. We were just chatting as people were coming in about what people might be doing next year, and we're getting on to the point of how many of you might be going to university, college next year. Put up your hand if that's what you're thinking of doing. And connect with that with what you know, I've been talking about as the leadership candidate. So my name is Paul Dewar, Member of Parliament from Ottawa, and I'm running for leadership of the NDP. So I should, you know, if you didn't know that. Hoping that you're going to take a look at the leadership race. This is about, in fact, you in a sense, because we're running to be leader of a party that is the official opposition. The decisions that are being made in Parliament affect you right now, and of course for the future. I would also encourage you to take a look at our party website and my website for that matter, to look at some of the ideas and the opportunity to be involved, because if you're not a member of the NDP, and I encourage you to do so, you can be a member and you can vote, and you have a direct impact on who the next leader will be. And we're the only party that has that offer. It's not a delegated convention. It's one member, one vote, and you can do that online. It's $5 to become a member, and the deadline is Saturday. It's the 18th. So that's my pitch in terms of take a look at that. I just wanted to say a couple things about young people and politics. I've been crossing the country since October the 2nd. I believe strongly that we as a party, but as a country, need to involve young people more in politics. I don't believe that as you might hear sometimes, young people aren't interested in politics. I think often we're having a different conversation, and you might look at, you know, politicians and say, why are they talking about that when I'm interested in this? And I think part of that is about participation, that there needs to be a way in which you can participate. You probably are involved in all sorts of issues or thinking about all sorts of issues, but sometimes you don't see political parties as the way to change things. I hope you look at us, and certainly my message to you is an invitation in, because I think that's what we need to do as parties, is to open ourselves up to young people. And to do that, we have to change the way we're organizing. And so what I've done is I've been working with young people right across this country to build up a network within our party, to invite people in, and not just on issues around during elections. Elections are very important, obviously, but in between elections, and on issues that matter to you. And to say, let's do issue-based campaigns in your community, but also around issues that affect you nationally. And my background is a foreign affairs critic since 2007 for my party, so I think international issues are very important, on the environment, on foreign relations, and what's happening, generally speaking, in the world. But it, you know, really starts at home with you. Finally, just want to say that on education, I put out what I think is a good idea after consulting many people on how we can change the way we fund post-secondary education, deal with the massive increase in tuitions that we're seeing. You know, I paid no more than $1,200 for my tuition. You're going to have to pay a lot more than that. And to also look at a way of being creative with how we deal with post-secondary education. And I put something forward. It's an idea called Your Canada Year. And the idea is the following, that for a year of community service from you as young people, through a program that is akin to Katumavik or Canada World Youth, where you would give you know, a year of your toil, we would give you a year's tuition. And that you would be able to volunteer in Canada, working for, you know, in a community somewhere in Canada or abroad, and that you would be given a year's tuition for that. And it's based on my belief that young people do want to serve, to give, to participate, and you can learn a lot from that, but we can also benefit from your involvement. And so it's on my website, take a look at that, but I also have some ideas about how we can reduce tuition, because it's not fair. I mean, the amount of debt that you're going to be carrying after you finish your post-secondary education, some people have said it's like having a mortgage without a house at the end, and that's clearly not fair. And you should know that this whole debate about OAS, you've been hearing about that? The changes that government was proposing to change the old age security from eligibility of 65 to 67. You're going, who cares about that? That's, the old people, and, and they're, I'm not worried about retirement. You should be worried about it, because actually what they're musing about is not about people who are, my age or older. They're talking about downloading it to you guys. And that should concern you, because that's not fair, and it's not fair for how much you're paying in your education. I'm going to stop there. More of your friends are coming in. I just actually want to open it up to people to see if you had any questions, what issues you care about. Have you been following the campaign? A lot of people have been saying, well, there's not much happening in the NDP leadership race. I think there is, but the journalists tend to have their own view of things at times. But just interested in questions you might have or issues that are important to you. We'll stop there. Here, go ahead. Just tell me your first name so we will know. You had your hand up. Go ahead.
I'm Paige, and I was wondering about your environmental campaigns. Things like gas taxes and more cycling.
Well, for me, climate change should be front and center of reform policy to start with.
Yeah.
But it also is about, how do people deal with it in their everyday lives? So I put forward a plan on my EEE plan, which is energy, environment, and economy. And I laid it out in Alberta because I thought it was very important in line with what's going on in Fort McMurray. And you look at the proposal of pipelines to take raw bitumen and just send it out of our country and ramp up production in Fort McMurray, which I think is wrong. I put forward a plan about how do we transform our energy from what we're depending on now to renewable energy. And here's what I think we should do. We should be giving the renewable energy sector the same supports that the fossil fuel industry has had for years. This year alone, the fossil fuel industry gets $1.3 billion in subsidies from all of you. And renewable energies aren't getting that. That's wrong. So we have to change that. They're not asking for a handout or extra. Renewables are asking for fairness. And to set a goal, and I'm saying by 2030, all of 100% of our electricity should be coming from renewable energy. And to do that, we have to look at how we build a sustainable grid in this country. So greening the grid, because a lot of the renewable energy that we can get, we don't have any place to put it. In other words, a transmission and a greening of a grid that we could actually, tap into. So that's something very important. But we need to, do things that are very smart and nimble. You talked about transportation. I think that some of our infrastructure money should be going into, obviously, rapid transit and into cycling. I mean, there is ample opportunity within cities and towns to put infrastructure into cycling. It's been done all over the world. I've been pushing it in Ottawa, and we've had some success there. But also into rapid transit. And I know that's different where where you're living right now, but if you look at how people get around, that's important when you're looking at climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. But the other thing we can do is look at how we can renovate businesses, homes, institutions so that they're more energy efficient. It's low-hanging fruit. It's been done in progressive countries. Manitoba is a great example where they focused on low-interest loans so people could do renovations to bring down their cost of energy for the pocketbook, but also how much they're relying on energy, and that, of course, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and it's an important piece. Finally, if you look at how much we can do and what we're not doing, it's enormous and it's frustrating. And I want to see my government, and I would push as a Prime Minister, to put as much as we can into conservation and transformation of our energy. And instead what we're doing is we're trying to strip out as much raw bitumen as we can, get it out of the ground, and not really thinking and focusing on how we should be using our resources wisely.
I had a question.
What's your name?
Laura.
Laura.
Okay, I was just wondering what your view was on the Canadian troops in Afghanistan, like whether you think that we should continue peacekeeping or
I just gave a speech on foreign policy at McGill University this past week, and I laid out what I think our foreign policy should be. I've been the foreign affairs critic since 2007. I've been to Afghanistan. I've actually been to Iraq. I've been to the Congo. I've been to other parts of North Africa. Though there are people who will say that peacekeeping is irrelevant now. I'm not one of those. I know it's relevant. You know, I've been to the Congo, where there is the largest peacekeeping mission since, well, for a long time. And it's not well resourced. And they've asked Canada and the United Nations to provide support for this mission. And we've said no 3 times in the last 4 years. And I think that's unfortunate, because we have the professionalism still, and they weren't asking for thousands and thousands of troops. They're actually asking for some equipment and some of our officer corps who are well trained in this area. Because on the ground in the Congo right now, you'll find blue helmets, peacekeepers, from places like Pakistan, from India, from Bangladesh, and nothing against them, but they're not as well trained. And as a result, the peacekeeping mission there has had problems. I would like to see our country get back into that again. And right now, our contributions to peacekeeping, we rank 53rd in the world. We're the country that created the idea. And so I think we should be back into the business of peacekeeping, innovation in peacekeeping, and particularly around women's role in peacekeeping and peace building. There's been a lot of innovation in the role of women in peacekeeping. India, for instance, did something very interesting. They had a whole brigade that was just women. And this is important when you look at some of these conflicts. In the Congo, in the East Kivu region, there is, you know about blood diamonds? I was looking for my BlackBerry, but I don't have it on me. In your PlayStations, in your iPads, in every piece of technology you have, that we all have in my BlackBerry, there's a mineral called coltan in it. 80% of that coltan comes from the Congo. And right now, the minerals are being used to finance conflict. And that conflict is pretty horrific. There's been about 5 million people since 1998 killed as a result of the conflict there. And that's why the peacekeeping mission's there. We are turning our backs on this conflict. The resource is being used to fuel conflict and horrific violence, particularly gender violence, where, sadly to say, rape is being used as a weapon of war against women. And that's where we should be. That's where we can make a big difference. On Afghanistan, you know, it's a really tough one. I was on the ground there and, you know, talked to our Canadian forces. I met with President Karzai. It's very complicated, but I think we would be better spending our resources and investing in peacekeeping in places like I mentioned, and there's other peacekeeping missions, than there. And here's why. I think right now what needs to happen in Afghanistan, we've said this for a number of years, is looking at how we end the war. And right now we're training you know, more troops for the Afghan army, and we're not sure where they're going to go. There's a huge attrition rate there where, you know, more than 10% of their soldiers just leave. We don't know where they go. I'm not sure we need to train more soldiers in Afghanistan. One thing they know how to do is fight. I don't think we need to train more to do that. And I think our best option there is to help with diplomacy. And we were going to be doing that up until just the extension of the war recently. And there was a great plan. I would have supported it. It came from the government itself, from the Department of Foreign Affairs, where there's going to be more diplomacy, more aid, and that plan was killed. And we decided to instead extend our military contribution there through training troops, and I think that's unfortunate. I wouldn't do that. Other questions? And open it up to everyone else. Sorry, there shouldn't be. Yeah.
Hi, Paul. I'm Bruce.
Hey, Bruce.
I know on your website you talk about responsible trade.
Yes.
This is the direction that you want to move in
Yes.
for international trade and free trade. Can you maybe talk a bit more about that? Maybe use China as an example, since that's a really delicate situation.
Sure. So for many years, the NDP would talk about fair trade, and I think that's a good concept. But I think, frankly speaking, people associated that with coffee, which is great. I worked in Nicaragua when I was a student, and you know, worked on a coffee cooperative, and this whole and from those days, it's now transitioned into something called fair trade for many items. I think to look at what we're trying to achieve, in my opinion, I think we need to talk about responsible trade. And so what I'm talking about here is trade deals between countries. And there's the CETA deal with Europe, and we could talk about that, about how that's going to undermine our healthcare system, amongst other things. But my idea of responsible trade is the following: is people say when you critique trade deals, they say, "Oh, you're against trade, Dewar. You don't believe in trade, and you're turning your back on the reality of present-day world and economy." I say, no, of course we have to trade. We're a small country. It's how we built this country, is through trade. But I think we need to talk about responsible trade. So what is responsible trade, and connect the pieces with China? I think we have to look at who's benefiting here. And so on the one hand, you want to make sure that as a country, you're not opening yourselves up to exploitation to the point where it undermines the benefits of your citizens. I mean, that's a natural thing that government should do. On the other hand, you shouldn't be exploiting people that you're trading with to the point where it's going to undermine their economy, their human rights, their labor rights, environmental rights. And so what I think we should be doing is practicing what is corporate social responsibility, but at a larger level when it comes to governments. And that is, when we're looking at trade deals and we're looking at trade arrangements, we should be looking at the records on environment, on labor, and human rights. And be explicit and say, yes, we need to trade, but we will reward those countries who are making attempts at improving all of the things I just mentioned, if they aren't already there. And to look at specific sectors where we can have a balanced and fair deal with other countries and be responsible. The problem with free trade deals is the following, and my father was actually used to negotiate that, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which was great because he used to go to Brussels 4 times a year, and in those days we didn't get Godiva chocolates here like we do now, so I always liked it because Dad would come home with great chocolates. But what he was doing was actually negotiating rules about how countries should trade. And that's, I think, important. We need to establish what the rules are, even things like, what items you will be trading, and then what about a fair price for that, and look at strategic interests for us in terms of where we could do value added. And the problem with, take China again, is that we send all of our raw materials there. We send all the raw logs, and someone said, we send all the raw logs and buy back the tables. We should be looking strategically at areas where we can do value added. But we have to have government planning that along with business, frankly, and with people who are workers and unions, and that's a kind of a European model. But the premise of responsible trade is just what I said, is to say that we're going to trade with people and make sure that, obviously we want to get a good deal, make some profits, but not at the expense of environment, human rights and labor rights, and be explicit about that. And I don't see a problem with that. It's being what I said at the beginning, responsible. Yeah.
I got two. One's very short.
Your name is, so everyone
Chris.
knows. Chris.
Sorry, Chris.
No, it's okay.
One is, I know that there was a bill in the last year that was voted on the right to die with dignity.
Right. Yeah.
And I know it failed. And I want to know your position on that, but also too, I'm a card-carrying NDP member along with my family, my whole family, and that we're doing a card drive with the steelworkers. But I want to know, I haven't made my mind up who I'm voting for yet, but I want to know what sets you different from the rest of the candidates. So I have two questions.
Sure. So the right to die, people are aware what that is. It's just what it sounds like.
I went through with my mom, and
Mm-hmm.
we treat our animals, it seems, differently than our loved ones.
Yeah.
And we don't have that right to do that currently right now. And I watched my mother, her health care deteriorate to the point that she didn't want to be left that way, so to speak. And I'm going through right now with my father-in-law, who I'm off on compassionate care. But I'd like to know the point on that, but also to what separates you from the rest of the candidates.
Sure. Just on the issue of the compassionate care, and I'm glad you're able to access that. That's something that's very important for people to be able to access. If your parent or loved one is dying, that you should be able to take care of them, particularly when you consider the state of our healthcare system when we don't have appropriate care. And that leads me to where I'm at with this. I think I don't have the answer on this, and I've looked at other models, and other countries that have had.
Netherlands.
Yeah, exactly, and there's some others, Switzerland, where it's a fine balance where I want to make sure that we are putting as much as we can into caring for others, to make sure that we have all the resources available for people who are at that state in their life and their families, and that we get that done, and then talk about what the rights are of people, because we aren't doing enough. I mean, I was fortunate. My father was able to die at home, but my mother was a nurse, my sister's a nurse. We had a team organized, and that was our luck. My mom died very suddenly and was in a hospital, and that was a different scenario. But I've too many people I've talked to who have to go through this choice, and really seeing their loved ones suffer and not getting the care they need, and knowing that frankly their quality of life is such that they don't want to continue. On the other hand, you'll have people I know very well who are within the abilities movement who are very strong in this and saying, wait, just careful here, careful with the law, because not that long ago, if we had the law going the wrong way, we'd have people who were my son, daughter, brother, or themselves could have been affected. So we have to get it right. But I guess the most important thing for me is to make sure that we have all of the right resources in place for those people who need the care to live and die in dignity. And we do not. And it's a huge hole, and it's getting worse. And people are really suffering as a result. And so what I think we should do in a good Canadian way is that this really does deserve, I know Royal Commissions people kind of turn off, but something along those lines around this. And that Parliament does need to be seized with this, to look at what all the options are and where the right balance is. But we need to do a much better job with in the health system to allow people to live and to actually die in dignity. How am I different from the others? It's always, you have to. I love my colleagues. They're great. We're in the same party and we share a lot of the same values. So I'll just talk about myself, and you can figure it out from there. I've had experience on the doorstep. I've won 3 elections back to back to back and grown each time. I've spent a lot of time working across the river in Quebec after 2008. I sent organizers and raised money for my colleagues in Gatineau and in Hull Elmer. I think that's extremely important. That's what we need to do. I've had experience on the national stage and on the international stage. And I think that's very important. I think the next leader should be someone who has domestic experience, international experience, and someone who knows how to connect with people. Because that's really what we need to do as a party, is be able to connect with people to win the next 70 seats. And that's what I put forward, is the next 70. And I've been the only one to really put a very specific plan on how we connect with people, young people, but people in ridings like this one, where we haven't had the support always from the federal party, and to put organizers on the ground and do grassroots politics. I'll say this for the Conservatives, they've done a very good job at grassroots politics and on issues, and I want to do that. I don't like the issues they're pushing, I don't like the kind of politics of division that they play, but they have done a very good job at building up what the grassroots are of the Conservative Party. We're a party of the grassroots. Our party came out of the grassroots. If you guys have looked in history and you look at CCF NDP, we came out of the grassroots of farmers and workers and everyday people. That's who we are. So let's do that. And that's what I'm all about. So in a nutshell, it's that experience, I think, that distinguishes me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we just checking these guys? Okay over here? I'm going to go here and then over here.
All right, my name's Jackson, and you mentioned some of the Conservatives' policies. What are some that you really don't agree with at all, and how would you change the...
I thought you were going to say which ones I agree with.
The list is shorter if you
But no, that's the important piece. It's so easy to be against something. And I'll never forget the first caucus meeting with Jack, 2006, I was elected. And we were around the caucus table, and he said, okay, we're a party, we're in opposition, but around this table, I want to hear proposition. I want to see, what are the ideas? And I think that's why so many people were attracted to Jack Layton, is that he was talking about, he was talking about hope, and he was talking about, looking at a better world, but how do you do that? So let me give you a couple. Let's talk about the environment. Instead of providing subsidies to, big oil, I would provide subsidies and actually investments, I'd call it, into renewable energies. When it comes to jobs, I would be investing in value added for our raw materials. Very important in Ontario right now, where we see, where Alberta is overheating the economy in a sense because of the resource-based industry there. And we haven't figured out how to manage that resource well. I mean, the business about talking about the Gateway Pipeline out to Kitimat, BC, or the Keystone to Texas, I mean, if that went through, we'd ramp up production of the tar sands to a point where it would, make what's going on right now look quite civil and quiet. And that's going to overheat your economy. And what that does to Ontario, the dollar goes up, which means our capacity to compete in Ontario is compromised. And so what I'd be doing is looking at how we can strategically invest in places like Ontario to do value added. And in an area that is important for all of you is in innovation and research and development. Do you know that 3/4 of the Conservatives, the way they do research and development, goes to research and development tax credits, which means you've got a company, you're going to produce a product, I give you a tax credit for it. I have no idea if you've already going to produce this or not, but I just give the money to you, here you go. It's like the corporate tax cuts they give. What other countries do is that they put a lot of their money into research and development, to public institutions, universities, and research. And guess what? They get better bang for the buck. I would change that for sure. And so that we could see Ontario, for instance, being innovators and starting to regrow our economy again in areas that will do value added. Value added just means taking a raw material or an idea and turning it into something that people actually buy. And I think we need to do that. So those are just a couple of areas. On foreign policy, I could spend 3 days with you on how I'd be different. But there is a speech I put out, the notes from last week on, and it's basically invest in diplomacy, invest in development, and invest in peacekeeping, in a nutshell. And I think that's, and responsible trade, as was mentioned.
Yes.
I was here and then here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess every NDP voter gets mad when they hear a Conservative say that they got a mandate from the majority of Canadians, because we all know that they got 39.6% of the vote, which is certainly not a clear majority. That's an unclear majority if I ever heard one.
Absolutely.
But it's not just...
What's your name? So everyone knows. I didn't know. Well, thanks, Walt.
But it's not just a partisan issue, because all the Liberal voters in Alberta elected no representation, and so did Conservative voters in 3/4 of Quebec got no representation. So my question is, over the next 3 years, how do we go about making this a priority issue and at the same time explaining that it's about voters' rights, not about party rights?
I think that's exceptional, important, because 40% of Canadians didn't vote in the last election. Now, I've gone to, about the Arab Spring, what happened obviously in Egypt, etc. And I've been to Morocco, Jordan, and people literally fighting for the right to be involved and to vote and putting their lives on the line. And we've had 40% of citizens who just didn't bother to vote. That's a message to us, hopefully, as politicians, and for those of us who care about politics. And I think the message is following. People think that the vote's not going to count. And if you think of you're a Liberal in downtown Calgary, or you're Conservative in downtown Ottawa, your vote. Why would I vote? Because I know these guys are going to get in. So people don't. We have to change. My belief is the voting system, so that we have some what's called proportionality in the system, so that you elect 3/4 of your members of Parliament the way we do now, first past the post, but then you have 1/3 of your seats designated for the percentage of votes that each party gets, with a minimum of 5%. What would a ballot look like? It would be, you get 2 votes, you get to vote for the person you want as your MP and the party of your choice. And then seats would be assigned, and we actually see the expression of the people show up in our Parliament. That's our party's policy. Before I was Foreign Affairs critic, I was Democratic Reform critic, and I shepherded that policy through our convention, and it's our party policy, and it's something that I think is very important for us to focus on, because it will show we're not just concerned about our party in power, we're concerned about our democracy and the fact that we have to reform it. The system we have now served its purpose, but you know what? It was actually conceived of before we had electricity. I think it's probably time we, take a look at it. And the other piece is our Senate. We have probably know this. Do we elect our senators? No. How do they get there?
They're appointed.
They're appointed by whom?
The Prime Minister.
Right. So we have people who serve the party well. One guy I love, I won't name names, but anyway, he's a senator, conservative, and he literally said, "I got here because I was the bag man. I raised money for the party." That's, that was his credentials. And this has been the history for too long. As a foreign affairs critic, I go to, I've led election observation teams in places like Jordan and in Morocco and Lebanon. And, when I tell them, oh yeah, we have a bicameral system, which means you have two houses, right? Commons and Senate. And I tell them, our Senate's appointed, they look at me in disbelief. Canada, this great country, which it is great, best country in the world, but we got this thing. and they don't believe me though, and they're like, wow, you've got an appointed Senate still? I said, yeah, that's our mother there in the UK with the House of Lords. And so we need to change those things. Because it's not a functioning democracy if you keep it the way it is, frankly. And so the way to do it is to say we would do it, we would change it, and be upfront about it. And the test is when you get in power, right? So if you win an election and you're in power, you think, oh, well, it's okay, we'll just forget about it. I would make it absolute priority and campaign on it so there's no surprises. And so that when you are elected as government, you bring in those changes. And they've done this in New Zealand, if you're interested in this. They actually just had a referendum recently in their last election to see if people still believed in this system. Exactly what I just explained. They did. And guess what? You have coalition governments, you have parties working together, and you don't have the kind of toxic atmosphere that you see when you turn on a question period here. And people work together.
Okay, my name is Greg. The reality is we have the right is united underneath the Tories. So I'm wondering, as NDP leader, what your strategy would be to turn this around and to actually gain power. And I like your thing about proportional representation, but you're more likely to get it if you're in power. So in the existing system,
yes,
what would you do to counteract the united right and get it?
Well, I would argue it wasn't uniting the right. I think it was a hostile takeover.
Well, whatever
and
it is, it's now.
If you follow the history, there was a progressive conservative party at one point, and it got swallowed up by the Reformed Canadian Alliance, and we have what we have now. I believe that the best way to deal with that is not to, I don't see a merger happening, so put that aside, between Liberals and whomever, Greens and the NDP. I don't see, I think what we have to do, and I put this out very concretely, is look at the next 70 seats we need to win and put our grassroots organization on the ground and explain to people what our policies are and connect on the ground. As I said, the Conservatives have done very well in this. And that's what we need to do. And then it come what may after an election. I mean, I believe that parties should work together in Parliament. I have no problem with that. But I don't think the idea, and I differed from Nathan Cullen, for instance, in the leadership race, who has said, to do joint nominations between parties to put one candidate against Conservatives. I think we'd be giving the advantage to the Conservatives who would use it against us, and it would undermine us, but also I don't think it would work. And I believe fundamentally in our party's challenge right now, we're official opposition. It's no time to start saying, okay, well, we can't do this. This is exactly the time to say, let's go out and build this further and take our message to people, bring in new people and show them why we're the party to bring in democratic reform, to ensure that people aren't left behind, to have sensible foreign policy and environmental policy, and just be very clear and strong on that. But you put in the window, as they say, that we will bring in democratic reform to have a fair system, so that you can't have majority, quote, majority governments with 39% of the vote. That's just something that is fundamentally flawed and wrong, and we'll change it.
Right on.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks a lot. CPAC channel quite a bit, and my blood really got boiling about the Open Security too, where I phoned Mars Britt Norlock, our MP, that served, that